Hi, everybody. I want to take you back to 1985 and the impact of WrestleMania 1. We're about 37 years later, and WrestleMania, that term, that phrase, the event, is pretty much well known worldwide. And I want to take you back to 1985, especially for those who are newer fans of pro wrestling or fans who became fans maybe in the 90s, the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars, and WrestleMania 1 obviously set the course for wrestling history, not only for the WWF slash WWE and the event called WrestleMania, but for pro wrestling as a whole. I think to appreciate the impact of WrestleMania 1, you have to understand the political climate in pro wrestling around that time. It was at the end of 1983, December of 1983, where Vince McMahon officially launched his national expansion and started going outside of the Northeast. Although by that time he had pretty much established Southern California, and he started with St. Louis, Missouri, which was the capital of the NWA. So that right there, understanding the impact of that move that he made. And fast forward to 1985 now in WrestleMania 1, we're about a year and 3 months after McMahon started his national expansion. And WrestleMania 1 was going to be the crown jewel of that national expansion effort. And Vince McMahon, what led up to this event was the Brawl to Settle It All in 1984, the involvement of Cyndi Lauper with the WWF. Cyndi Lauper in 1984 was a big star. She was in the pop charts at the top of the food chain. Everybody knew who she was. Her video "Girls Just Want to Have Fun," utilizing Pro Wrestling Manager Captain Lou Albano. And so the Brawl to Settle It All was on MTV. And again, MTV was just a few years old, but it became hugely popular, the most popular cable channel. So she managed a female wrestler named Wendy Richter, and then Captain Lou Albano managed Fabulous Moolah, the world champion. And then, of course, Wendy Richter won the title, Cyndi Lauper managing her. This was the beginning of what they called the Rock and Wrestling Connection, which you had the baby faces of WWF like Hulk Hogan, involved with Cyndi Lauper and her manager David Wolf, and you had Captain Lou Albano, who soon became a babyface manager, Hillbilly Jim. So you had this rock and wrestling connection that Vince McMahon utilized to cross over the WWF into the mainstream. This led to a second event called War to Settle the Score in February of 1985 that actually was the event. It was broadcast on MTV that actually created WrestleMania. And this was Hulk Hogan against Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper had started bad-mouthing Cyndi Lauper and rock and wrestling. Also, this whole rock and wrestling connection, because of the involvement of Cyndi Lauper, was bringing in Hollywood personalities into pro wrestling. Wrestling was starting to really cross over. Not to mention, in December of 1984, you had the 2020 John Stossel incident. There was a big part of getting the WWF into the mainstream consciousness. So the War to Settle the Score, basically, it set up the two main events of WrestleMania 1, which was the semi-main event of Wendy Richter against Leilani Kai, who was managed by Fabulous Moolah, Wendy by Cyndi Lauper. The War to Settle the Score event in February on MTV, and I believe it was live because I watched it. I watched it as it happened. Wendy Richter lost her title to Leilani Kai. So that was the rematch, WrestleMania 1. And then what set up the main event was Mr. T getting involved in the main event of Hulk Hogan against Roddy Piper, because Paul Orndorff, Roddy Piper's friend, part of Piper's Primetime, got involved. This set up the tag match. Piper, Mr. T against Orndorff. No, Mr. T, Hulk Hogan against Orndorff and Piper. And Orndorff and Piper would have Cowboy Bob Orton in their corner. Mr. T and Hulk Hogan would have Jimmy Superfly Snuka in their corner. For those of you who weren't around at that time watching pro wrestling, a lot of newer fans, you cannot begin to appreciate the atmosphere leading up to this event. When I say atmosphere, I'm talking about the month and a half or so leading up to it, from the time War to Settle the Score aired. The world was buzzing about this event, which was unique because you got to remember, pro wrestling, for the most part, had been pretty much off the radar of mainstream culture. It was a subculture. And it had gained mainstream appeal in the 50s because of the newness of TV. So TV stations were filling their air with pro wrestling. And then it got burnt out by the late 50s, and then it went back into being a subculture. The mainstream media outlets were hyping this event because, again, Mr. T from the A-Team was a big, big celebrity at this time. Many people don't appreciate that today, just like they don't appreciate Cyndi Lauper. But at that time, Cyndi Lauper and Mr. T were not just B celebrities, C celebrities. Nowadays in pro wrestling, you get celebrities that have gone involved with the product, and they've been kind of, not really big. And because of today's celebrity culture with social media, a lot of celebrities don't have the mystique they used to have. But at this time, when there's only a certain amount of cable stations, no social media, no internet, to be a celebrity was a big deal. There was a mystique around them because there wasn't that many of them, because there was a limited amount of entertainment available. Mr. T was big. He was on the A-Team, which was a primetime NBC show, hour-long kind of drama action show. Cyndi Lauper was at the top of the food chain in the pop charts. And their styles were both unique. Well, they were involved in this WrestleMania event, so the media outlets were really hyping this event up. And you had Mr. T, Hulk Hogan appear on various talk shows the week leading up to the event, and they even appeared on Saturday Night Live on the Saturday night before WrestleMania 1 aired on closed circuit TV. And by the way, this was at the time pay-per-view was very limited. So if you in most parts of the country, if you wanted to see WrestleMania 1, you had to go to a closed circuit location, buy tickets, and watch it at a closed circuit arena. But the excitement in the air and the anticipation and the stakes that went into this event, because behind the scenes in the wrestling world, it was known that this was a make or break event for Vince McMahon. And the break part of it was this could have really put Vince in a big hole financially and pretty much ended his run, his campaign to go national, and possibly even put him out of business. I don't know. The make part of it, which happened, was that Vince was going to establish the WWF as the main brand in pro wrestling. Because pro wrestling was now pouring into the mainstream consciousness of Americana. And the WWF was, when people thought of pro wrestling at this time, they thought of WWF because of this event. So WrestleMania 1 takes place. And unlike future WrestleManias, Vince didn't utilize all of his talent. There was plenty of talent he had that he didn't put on the show, because his strategy was for this event that every match would mean something. It was used to promote new arrivals, recent arrivals like King Kong Bundy and Ricky Steamboat. Used to further a feud by having Tito Santana win with the figure four leg lock over a masked Buddy Rose, the Executioner, and for him to get involved in the Junkyard Dog Greg Valentine Intercontinental title match. You had the Andre Big John Studd Body Slam Challenge, which this was big. Would Andre, he would have to retire if he couldn't body slam Studd. Then, of course, you had the tag team match, Barry Windham and Mike Rotundo against Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov. Then you had the two main events that I mentioned, Lalani Kai, Randy Richter going over Lalani Kai, and then, of course, the tag match, Piper and Orndorff against Mr. T and Hulk Hogan. By the way, Mr. T at this time has credibility. He had a credibility as a tough guy from being on the A team, and apparently he had been a bouncer in Chicago nightclubs, even fighting in a tough man contest. And he looked legit. He had a great body, great look, and he performed. I got to give Mr. T credit. He performed extremely well in this event. And much credit goes to Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper for working well with him. You know, in the end, Hogan wins. Hogan and Mr. T win, and in a controversial fashion in terms of it actually sparks a new feud with Paul Orndorff turning babyface because Piper and Orton would use Orndorff as a scapegoat for losing that event. But more to the impact. After WrestleMania 1, what happened in the WWF territory or house show system, because they're going national by this point, and they're having shows all over the country, an A tour, a B tour. And what happened was the attendance after WrestleMania 1 in a lot of the cities was down for a couple months. And maybe, I don't know, I think it might have been 2 months, because naturally after a big event where people are spending money around the country to watch a big mega event like WrestleMania, it's kind of like anticlimactic to go to the arena the next month when you had a big show. That's just traditional pro wrestling. But as soon as that brief downturn in attendance happened, the WWF blew up. Their attendance skyrocketed in the summer of '85 and beyond. And then really WrestleMania gets the credit for hitting that home run. But I think I knew as a fan at 11 years old that pro wrestling had arrived for good. Was Saturday night's main event for the first one in May of 1985 at the Nassau Coliseum. When they preempted Saturday Night Live and put on Saturday night's main event in its place, I knew wrestling had arrived. It'd be on network TV for the first time since the 1950s. There was something special about that time period. I remember as a kid, I couldn't get enough of wrestling. And then I started watching AWA and NWA and World Class around that time too. But that time was so special. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget as little kids, me and my friends, we didn't know. We were always watching primetime wrestling and TNT on USA Network, the weekly WWF Championship Wrestling and All-Star Wrestling. And we thought we could just watch WrestleMania 1 on cable. So we're looking on cable on USA Network and Channel 9. Back then, that's the show locally that it was on in LA, WWF Wrestling. And we couldn't find it. So I remember we're going to people's houses in the neighborhood, knocking on the doors to see if they had WrestleMania on. It was funny. But later, of course, it was released on VHS. But it was so special, that time period, as a wrestling fan. I remember even watching WWF All-Star Wrestling Saturday night, right, the night before WrestleMania. I watched Saturday night's main event. Then I watched WWF All-Star Wrestling from, I think it was from London, Ontario, and seeing the British Bulldogs, Don Morocco, wrestle. And thinking, man, it was such a magical time to be a fan. But WrestleMania 1, the impact of that, establishing the WWF as the main brand in pro wrestling, and establishing pro wrestling as not just a passing fad, but as a permanent fixture in American culture. Good. You guys have a good one. That's my take on WrestleMania 1 and its impact. Bye.